The next 45 minutes are all about us sharing the contents of our brain on the topic, of globalization. Let's be super clear here. What do we mean? We have, on the one hand, a short-term hit, COVID. Many of you watching this are potentially not in Germany, but you're still in your home country. You couldn't travel to Germany because there simply aren't flights. So many conferences have at first been cancelled, now they've moved online. How do we cope with that? What's the opportunity in that? That's short term. But then there is the long term, because we all could feel it. There had been cracks in what we called globalization. We know now it's not very resilient, and there are plenty of examples. Look at the US, where the inflow of students from abroad has been limited. Now we had reports of Chinese students, they said as they wanted to leave the country, they were asked to hand over phones under the suspicion of bringing IP abroad. And then Patrick, he mentioned to me, hey, he just came from London to join the panel. The United Kingdom might not just leave the EU, but also the Erasmus student exchange program. So long term, we have seen hits to globalization. With a very distinguished panel, we want to figure out who is going to suffer, who is going to benefit, and what does all of this mean for German students, students in Germany and German universities. Who do we have on the panel? First of all, thank you very much for joining us. Professor Thomas Hofmann, President of the Technical University in Munich, TU München. We also have with us Professor Patrick Haggard. He is a Max Planck School Fellow at the School for Cognition. Thank you so much for making the way from London. Also, we have with us Professor Beate Schücking. It was a bit of a shorter drive in your case. You're coming from Leipzig. You're the rector of the University of Leipzig. Also, we have Professor Walter Rosenthal with us, President of the Friedrich Schiller University in Jena. And we have with us Dr. Hanieh, Fattahi, Fellow of the Max Planck School of Photonics in Erlangen. And actually, it's the same school, Professor Günter Leugering. He's the Vice President of the Friedrich Alexander University in Erlangen, Nürnberg. And finally, thank you for joining us, Professor Bernhard Eitel, President of the University of Heidelberg. And by the way, big thanks to the students who reminded us you were going. We've got 5 directors of universities. Where are the fellows? Here they are. Very good call. Now, first question is going to Patrick. And by the way, we live in the same city. I've also chose to live in London, and I remember at my school, full of students from outside the EU, and later I learned, not a coincidence, the fees are higher. Now, with fewer Chinese students arriving, do you worry that University College London might not pay your salary in the near future?
Well, I think in Britain we have built a strange and unsustainable business model for our universities, because there is some government support for the domestic students, for the home students, but it's insufficient. And the additional money that universities require, particularly to fund their research, is generated by charging higher fees to foreign students. And that, at one level, is a positive thing, because it's encouraged the internationalization of the university. At another level, it's led to perhaps a suboptimal business model, where we are perhaps insufficiently focused on our immediate domestic market, and we are often offering not as good a product as we should to international students simply because we depend on their business. And we need, therefore, to be very attentive to offer genuine academic experience, not to rely on students coming only from one country. So many UK universities have depended too much on China. And to think about internationalization of academic activity, not just as an export market to get rich, but also as part of a wider academic vision to encourage knowledge and spread of interaction. So I think we've been a little bit too cynical, and the COVID crisis is making us think more carefully about how we run the universities and how we genuinely offer something to the rest of the world.
In all honesty, the quality argument works both ways. If you're incentivized to accept a student who's going to pay 2-3 times the fees, how do you assess the quality of the students with that incentive system, Patrick?
Well, we admit the best students we can, and we assess them according to their academic credentials. I think we do try to make sure that we have a diversity of students, so we try not to recruit too much from one country, and we try to always pay attention to the potential to benefit from being in the university. And I think we have to remember that academic exchange and mobility and learning are generally a force for good, both for the individual concerned and also perhaps in a wider geopolitical sense. So there's something like a knowledge mission that happens when a university attracts an international student to come and study there. And it's not just a business transaction. So I think that's something which we need to remember in the way that we message to our international students, that we welcome them and that we hope to give them an opportunity for cultural and academic interaction.
And if I look back at my time at London School of Economics, one of the main cultural experience was getting drunk on Old Compton Street. That was really crucial part of the whole thing. But now let's look at the data. Our premise partly was globalization is a little bit in reverse potentially. And Thomas, what's your experience from TU München? Enrollment of international students for the semester, up or down?
We've seen many years, I think about 20, 25 years, where we said we want to become really international, because I can just agree with what you said. It's the diversity of people that makes the success, that makes the progress. And that's why we started early enough with international master programs, and that pays out today with about 32% international students at TUM, for example. And this year, instead of Corona, we have an additional increase by 20% of applicants. So that's really surprising. Shows that obviously Europe, particularly when you have international programs, become more attractive for young people from all over the world.
Okay, might potentially also be the profile of TU München, which is very strong in the rankings. Let's not be shy about that. Curious to hear what your colleagues have to say. But then let's quickly get some more data on the issues with globalization in education. And one of our panelists, that's Hanieh Fattahi, you had one of those problems because you were planning to go to Harvard for 2 years. In the end, it was only 3 months. What happened?
Okay, I have a personal story to say. I did my PhD in Germany, and then after my PhD, I applied for Minerva Fast Track Scholarship of Max Planck Society, which was very exciting to get that. For the program, there is a defined time that one can go and stay abroad. So I had an idea in my mind to combine what I learned during my PhD and implement it on a kind of traditional imaging system. And the professor who was pioneered in this kind of imaging, he was in Harvard. So I contacted him, everything nice and rosy, and then he told me, join us for a 2 years stay. So when I wanted to apply for the visa, at that time, it was exactly the same time that the new president became in power, right? And then there was a change of policy. And originally, I'm from Iran, so I had a dual citizenship. And everything was so confusing that what should we do now with people with dual citizenship? What's the policy? So there was no definition. Then the process of getting the visa took 1.5 years. More than 1.5 years, right? Okay. And just take it into account that at this level of your life, you are an adult, right? You have family. I don't have kids. But imagine that you have kids and you can't plan this uncertainty that when the visa comes, right, doesn't let you to plan anything. So as an alternative, I stayed for a period of time in Oxford. That was very good because it was immediately possible to do such a thing. And then when the visa came, then I went to Harvard, but at that time, my focus was also shifted, right? My life is going on. I was moving to the next step of my career, so I was trying to get my own research group.
So it was a bit the equivalent of somebody saying, shall we marry in 2 years?
Right.
And then 1.5 years later, I met somebody else.
Right.
Let's bring that back to Thomas, because this is a story of Harvard losing a bright mind. a brain, in the words of Professor Alt, that could have been shared with the US. They lost out. Now, do we see similar cases when it comes to other top researchers or even professors?
Indeed. Just have a look back this year. We have several cases where we finally negotiated with US professors, and it was planned that they will come over in about a year, and now they come back and say, is there any chance to come earlier? Just in 3 or 4 months. So I have really the feeling that was from Boston, for example, a colleague from Boston. We have 2 others from Texas A&M, where we see that there is the willingness of former Europeans living in US since several years. They want to come back for several reasons. Another reason is probably that the number of open positions, faculty positions, dropped dramatically in US. Over the last 10 years, we have every year about 500 new faculty positions, open faculty positions that were advertised today in 2020, since today, 2020. So it dropped from 500 to 2020. That means the opportunities at the moment, these opportunities are not there in the US system. And that's a major challenge for US. It's a pity for science. It's a great opportunity for Europe.
Okay, so here we see a first potential for German universities to benefit, but another element of being attractive is making yourself attractive. And here I'd be curious, Bernhard, Professor Bernhard Eitel, Heidelberg, of course, beautiful town, who wouldn't love to live there for a while, but what else do you need to do to attract very bright foreign students?
Well, I think first of all, we have to support them arriving in Heidelberg. So they have priority in to get access to housing, to find some opportunities to spend their life. The second one is within the university, we support them by a graduate academy. They are all members of the Graduate Academy of Heidelberg University. So we help them to cross all the disciplinary borders. They are embedded in the scientific environment on the campus, in city, in the town, but also in our abroad engagement, the offshore campuses of Heidelberg University and elsewhere. So we support them also with money. Our doctoral students have an own status. They have a doctoral convent. They are represented in Heidelberg University Senate. So we provide them with own money. So they have different support systems, and also the doctoral students, in a very unbureaucratic way, they can help themselves because they know exactly what they need. And I think that's a huge advantage also for newcomers. So
what I hear from you is you make it easy for them, you give them a say, and you even give them some money to spend. What I heard from you as we chatted yesterday was, in the past was for travel, like go to a conference or meet another professor, whatever, in Stockholm. But now traveling isn't the big thing. What do students spend the money now on?
We think that they should get individual support. So every person, every individual, every doctoral student, maybe female, maybe male, have different purposes, different needs. So, for example, if you are a biologist and during pregnancy you can go to your lab, you can get support in order to get an assistant doing all the lab work for you, so you have no delay in your academic career. You can bridge such times, and that's a huge advantage for young scientists, not having any difficulties to create your own career pathway and to find good steps to organize your future.
So one model, give very, very individual support. And then if we look at Jena, the University of Jena, Walter Rosenthal, you have chosen to invest a lot of money in making your buildings really nice. You're building a campus. Tell us about it.
Yeah, I think that infrastructure is very important to make a university attractive. With a bad infrastructure, you cannot attract students and you cannot attract researchers. So I think this is very important, and we have invested quite a lot in that. We have different campi in Jena, and we are just started with a new one, Inselplatz, and I think this will be very important for the future. But it's
how much are you investing, by the way?
Well, in the relatively small University of Jena, we will invest 300 million over the next 5 years or so, and that money will go into new campi and not individual buildings. It will also go into places for communication. We are in a very lucky position that we can spend quite a bit of money for communication buildings. They are really only for communication, not seminar rooms or labs, but meeting points. We will have 2 meeting points in the city because I think this is very important for the students and especially international students and everybody.
One thing I hear a lot from your colleagues, and for example, Professor Hofmann, he was saying, we have these huge lecture halls for thousands of people, and like, will we need them in the future? Do you sometimes get second thoughts on these 300 million euros, be honest?
Well, we don't spend the money on large lecture halls, only a minor part. And you are right, I think that we probably need less in the future because we've learned in the crisis that the huge lecture halls, what you do in the huge lecture hall, you cannot communicate with the students, and so this is easily done in a digital way. And we need more meeting points for small groups, seminar rooms. We need better labs for students and more labs for students where they can work. And this is the way to go, and not the large lecture hall.
So
individualize the teaching. This is, I think, the future. And that the digitalization makes that actually easier and gives us a huge chance to do that in a better way than in the past.
What we learn is smaller universities, they also have to up the game because in this race for the smartest brains that could be shared, they need to offer something. But we have an example how you can do lectures completely without a hall, because in Leipzig, I learned, you sometimes started doing lectures and seminars in the park. Professor Beate Schücking, how did that work out?
Well, we gave a lot of freedom for our professors just during the last month to experiment, and they really took good opportunity, and so several of them just met in the park. So at some point our students were very aware that they could do everything online, but still they lacked the personal touch. They wanted to meet their professors, they wanted to meet their colleagues, so several of them just met in town, met in the park, and got the kind of personal touch they needed.
Okay. I would imagine in a park it could be very distracting if there were to be somebody whom I personally find very attractive jogging along, but that could be distracting. Anyways, I know that in the beginning many schools started with drastic measures, very massive lockdowns. You didn't. What was the rationale behind that?
Well, we knew from the beginning that the situation in Leipzig wasn't that bad, so we had only very few cases, and we were regarding the situation like really every day. And then my idea was continuation of the university as much as possible. And I am very convinced that this was a good path because in the end we were asking our students, and thousands of them responded to us, how did you like the last semester, and were you successful, and how did you experience it? And in the end more than 80% had the success they wanted. The main problem still was I would have loved to meet more people. Yeah, so looking into the month to follow now, the winter, the challenge for us is how to give them as many possibilities as possible, still with social distancing, of course, but give them as many possibilities to come together.
So you did what we should do as scientists. You looked at the data. One, what is really the risk profile in Leipzig? But two, you also took data. What do you want? What is good for you, dear students? And being connected, feeling connected, that is also a marker of health and success in life. Now, a very different approach. Some of your professors and students went into nature, into gardens, and then opposite in Erlangen at the university, Professor Günter Leugering, I understand you had botanical field studies happening with people not actually going into the field. How did you pull that off?
Well, first of all, I think we should realize we're talking about two scales. You know, the first, the short range in time and then the long range in time. And I think we need to understand that once this is over, we don't want to get to the same normal situation. So we need to change the standard. We need to change what is now the normal situation. Now, one thing that you mentioned comes along, we all do big efforts in designing, online lectures and fora and so on and so forth. Most of the time it is like classical teaching, you have, we know all about inverted classroom and stuff. One thing is important for universities, in particular for technical universities, or universities have a technical or engineering faculty like University of Erlangen and Nürnberg, is labs, is field studies. You can do a lot, even for international students, to allude to the speech of Professor Alt, to keep them out of the country while the COVID-19 pandemic is still active and they still can share brains, as he was strengthening. But finally you have to go to the real thing, right? And how is that done? And in this case, this was a nice thing. So we have, first of all, I should say, we have an institution that accompanies people in designing new courses. So it's not good to do online lectures from scratch. You will probably fail. So you need didactic support. And this was done in that framework. We have what we call Alex. So this is 5 awards that we put out for particular innovation in teaching, online teaching, and this is one of them where it's discussed whether it will win or not. And now, what is the thing? So this is about plant identification, this is taxonomy, you have to go out into the field, you have to go with your professor, and this is one of the typical things you do, in face-to-face. Now, if you think about it, what do you really need? You need to be able to, to identify plants. First, you can train in a self-training. You can train with sample plants. Your ability to distinguish between plants, you have a multi-questionnaire and so on and so forth. And what I find very nice is the following. So they know where the plants, you find the plants in the wood here or the mountain there, and they put the GPS data of the plants onto the web, right, and do the time scheduling so that it is guaranteed nobody, interferes with each other, but you are sure you go with where the plant is, all right, and then you come back with your sample, and then you can do your herbarium also in a assessed way, and then you do the examen, online. Everything completely online, which used to be a classical thing, which is not possible online.
So it sounds very much like Pokemon, just with plant specimens.
And what I'm saying is, here you need to look into long range. Are we going back to standard lectures or not?
Okay,
well,
let's hear what your colleagues have to say. And yes. I know, Thomas, to kick it back to you, that you have invested very heavily, not actually in one big centralized system that everybody uses, but in building capabilities. What exactly have you done to help teachers teach in new formats now?
So we started a lot of experiments. So, for example, we tried to engage the students also, so the students are one player in this new format. So, for example, we recruited about 500 so-called e-scouts students in times where they didn't have the opportunity, for example, to earn some money in serving in their. That's not working.
Yeah, we have a second mic for you.
So these e-scouts, for example, help the professors to create the new formats, the videos, all different type of things. And then I think what we learned all this time is also that you need a clever combination of different formats to come into contact, into interactivity with the students, not to have just a one-way type of information transfer, but to really engage the students, for example, by clever combining asynchronous and synchronous type of formats. So, for example, first a kind of a basic lecture to get the information first, and this is then followed by a synchronous format where the students come into direct contact with the professors, and then, for example, they split again after 10 minutes in 10 different groups. The different groups, the subgroups of students discuss a certain topic and then come back with the result, and the entire groups then are discussing the outcome. So this is how we engage the students, and coming back to what also you said, the feedback from the students is outstanding because they say, obviously this type of format brings us much more into an active role of learning.
Mm-hmm. So what I hear from you is also everybody involved, professors, students, everybody else, need to be more conscious now how learning can happen. We all need to put in more care and effort.
Exactly, and what I learned that it's always clever to listen to the students because they have so bright ideas. So we started, for example, at the beginning of the year, the TUM Future Learning Initiative. So we asked 43,000 students to submit their ideas how teaching and learning should look like in 5 years from now. So what are their visions, new formats? What do they want? How do they see that? In particular, when you have with the more than 30% international students, they bring ideas from all over the world. And to listen to them, select the best ideas, and then put it in place. That's the strategy, how I think the university can improve. And we are constantly in a change.
Very, very quickly, Thomas, yes or no answer. Once we feel we have a grip on Corona and all this, will you go back to the old ways?
We will go on with this type of formats. We will have definitely a good mixture, a hybrid system, where I think it's based on information transfer on the one hand, probably more digitally, but then use the time on campus for human interactivity and human engagement in teams, bring the students together in teams.
Cool. Now, I see Patrick nodding, and I so wish, as we speak about the psychology and the neuroscience of learning, that we had a neuroscientist in our panel, and we do! Patrick, well, what insights do we have from neuroscience about how we now learn with these different systems?
Well, I think, first of all, we're social animals, and I think education is a rather interesting social interaction where people come together in relatively close contact in order to share information, transfer information, and as such it's a very important element of culture. And I think that the educational space is one which probably needs to be preserved. So I think you can simulate it online, I think you can have useful online education, but one thing that you learn in online education is that students really value the contact with the teacher. And I was personally very lucky because I was asked 1 year ago to teach a discussion group for the Max Planck School of Cognition, and I was initially somewhat terrified that this would be entirely online, but I rose to the challenge and I learned a lot from trying to keep an informal and quite dynamic discussion group going with those excellent students over the last year, and it turns out to be now very, very useful experience generally because all such teaching is looking like that. And the few things that I've learned are the teachers need to demonstrate the enthusiasm to bring the students in. I think that's harder online than it is directly. So one thing that neuroscience shows us is that we're always making social signals to each other to engage each other. We have to try harder to do that in the online environment, but teachers will need to do that to get students to engage.
And quite frankly, I find it hard over the distance to get your social cues.
It's already
this is
hard.
probably in meters the longest panel I have ever moderated. Now, let's take your point on learning is a social experience and maybe kick it over here to Bernhard Eitel. How do you facilitate that now?
Yeah, I think that's really true. And in particular in research universities, you need the contact in labs, in libraries, maybe in other contexts. You need direct access to the materials you need for your research, and you need the exchange with your colleagues, also with students, because they want to see the eyes of their colleagues. They want to see that the other students have the same problems with the materials, with the subject as you as well. So otherwise you are a very lonely rider at home with your iPad or with your computer, and you can get a lot of problems with your own mentality. But the exchange of your own experience is very important. And I want to stress one more aspect of German universities and Germany as a whole in the moment. It's a really open and safe place for foreign students. Where in the world you can move as a foreigner, where you can go with your bicycle and you can ride over landscapes across cities. You are very free, very open, and in our universities, embedded in the cities, you always have also space to meet, not in universitary context, but also in the city as well. So I always stress the fact that study or studying is not only learning in the university, but also exchange in more open context, maybe in a pub, in a cafe, or in other environments. And that's very important for me to stress that this interaction with the environment is also important, and not only the exchange between scientists and students and teachers.
When you just asked this question, what would be a country where you're safe at night, you can go around, I was thinking, probably North Korea, but there are other issues with that, and I would love to kick this over here, because you made the point earlier on, Professor Walter Rosenthal, that freedom of research is another benefit, and of course I'm taking the piss here a little bit, sorry about that.
Yeah, I think that's getting more and more important, because in many countries freedom of research and teaching is decreasing, in some countries in a very drastic way. In other countries more in a subtle way, maybe, and I think that in Germany really we enjoy freedom, full freedom of research and teaching, and I'm pretty sure that this is very attractive for international students to come to such a place, combined with all the other things we already discussed, that we have a stable basis, a financial basis, because we are financed by public money. And I think this is attractive and will increase the attractiveness of German universities and research institutions compared to other countries.
So the beauty of the mere ability, I can research what I truly care about, and somebody else, at least my professor, cares about too. And we'll hear more about that in the keynote, about the passion of science. But now the big moment has come, because we have a wild card here. That wild card is Hanieh. Hanieh, I learned before joining the panel, just called up a couple of Nobel Prize winners in her phone book. So I'm curious, as you prepared with these Nobel Prize winners, which topics did they bring into this discussion through you?
Well, I just wanted to also talk about some statistics. Because US is the traditional destination, has been the traditional destination, right? For students to just go there and explore, and go ahead and explore, and for ambitious people, right? So I'm just quoting Stephen Chu, the Nobel laureate, on this data that I'm talking about. There are 143 Nobel laureates in the US who are the first generation immigrant. That shows the importance of just attracting good students and have this mobility in science. And they just form 37% of the whole Nobel Prize winners. And then I just give you a bit more numbers. Maybe it is decreasing now, maybe in the US because of the political situation, but I again quote Stephen Chu. In 2017, 37% of the graduate students in the US were from foreign countries, especially China, India, and Middle East. So what I want to emphasize on is that the policy is changing in the US, and it made it hard for students to reach to this traditional destination. But these 30% people, they are flying all over Europe, and they have this connecting flight which sits in Frankfurt, Berlin, or Paris, or one of these big cities. So now it's a good chance, really, to just make this flight, to just make Germany the final destination for these brilliant people who want to explore their ambitions outside.
Okay. So again, the opportunities, people that have hard time elsewhere might just go where it's easier. And that brings us to the here and now. We've talked a lot about the long term in terms of globalization for education, but right now, right here, short term, we've seen a lot of students with real difficulties. Especially foreign students rely on their ability to work, to have some extra income. So, Professor Schücking, how could you help your students that needed this help over the last few months?
Well, we knew immediately that our foreign students would be in need, because so many of them are working, and working like in restaurants and bars and places where you can work in the evening, and this was all closed in Leipzig as well. So we created a sponsor program, and we got quite some money, both from the community and from inside the university, to help our foreign students, which was encouraging, really, I think, for all of us. And I think it also plays a role in the fact that I'm quite proud of that we too have even more foreign students now for the next year.
Okay, so the numbers are up. It's not just TU München. It's a trend everywhere. Currently, the average in Germany, I learned that from you, is between 12–13%. Foreign students. Would be very curious in a bit. And Patrick, if you have figures off the top of your head, what we have in the UK here?
Yeah, I think in undergraduate, it's between about 10 and 25%, but it's at postgraduate level, there are lots of international students.
Yeah.
There's a massive demand, particularly for master's courses, and I think that has been one of the big changes in international education in the last 20 years, is the growth of the short master's course, 1 or 2 years, and that is a highly internationalized market. And I think I would just like to make one point, which is perhaps a slightly political point. So one of the results of the coronavirus pandemic has been a kind of an introspective nationalism. So many countries have put up barriers and have reverted to thinking about immediate national priorities. And I think viruses don't respect borders. And we do live in a world where countries will need to get on together. So I think universities play a special role in continuing to make international bridges and in international exchange and in allowing people to get to know each other across the world. And this perhaps goes back to Hanieh's interesting point about the relation between university education and immigration. There's potentially a force for good there, which universities need to keep hold of, even as political barriers start to go up.
Now, Patrick, there is the flip side too. I know, for example, in the UK, we need more doctors in that country, and so there are initiatives to make it easier for people from places like, just grab Bangladesh, for example. Is the UK stealing the bright future doctors from countries that need them more urgently?
I don't think this is just related to the UK, but I think one of the things that we need to bear in mind when we talk about globalization, there's good globalization and there's bad globalization. And one of the emerging problems in globalization is if rich countries with good university systems simply extract the best brains from poor countries and remove them, then there's a net transfer of capacity away from countries that really need it. So universities, I think, need to be more aware of the UN Sustainable Development Goals in their international recruitment. They need to encourage students to get the maximum benefit from being in the host country, but also to remember that maybe they want to pay it forward and pay it back, and maybe the university training is one of the vehicles which can allow for positive interaction and transfer of knowledge back to the country of origin. So I don't think it must not be a one-way street. And I think in that sense, universities can be a force for the, as it were, the good aspects of globalization.
So to use the analogy of Professor Alt, or the idea of Professor Alt, brain sharing shouldn't turn into brain stealing. And I would like to bring that to you, Günter, Professor Leugering. As universities appear to become slightly less physical spaces and more networks, as we explored in the beginning, do you expect access to good education to become easier, fairer, or harder, less fair?
It's a very important question, and we discussed it already a little bit in the context of the US, where you see an interesting movement. So now the Ivy League, they're gaining, and the lower tier universities are losing students. And the question is, what will be the picture in Germany? And indeed, I think this is not clear at this point in time, whether we have, when a university like Erlangen, there is the local aura of a university, Erlangen, Jena, Leipzig, versus, metropolitan regions is getting less important. And so it is more important, where do students go? I mean, they go maybe to excellence places, or they go where the teaching is good. But there will be a certain dynamics in the student movement in the near future, which is due to Corona, but maybe there is a certain equilibrium that will be reached, and that, you know, the situation will be there.
Okay, so we're not entirely sure how this is going to play out. Before we wrap up, I would also love to hear a couple of thoughts on the first year of the Max Planck schools. And we're not kicking off, but what I would love from each one of you, super crisp, super short, maybe one short sentence. What is your top #1 win from the first year? What worked really well? Or alternatively, let's talk about warts and all. What is one thing that in the first year hasn't been achieved and it should have been achieved? You would have wanted just the top one sentence. Take your time to think about it. But before you do, I would like to bring it back briefly to Hanieh. As you now look at the issues with globalization, long-term, short-term, you've experienced with both. What would your prediction be personally from this COVID crisis? Will we see a more globalized education space or less globalized?
Oh, I think now there is no way back, right? We had a fast forward to future. Now we all learn to use all these artificial techniques. We are used to now web-based conferences, web-based lectures, and so on. So just to give you an example, one of the biggest conferences in my major, in photonics, is happening in Clio. It's called Clio. And the number of participants there has been always around 4,000 to 5,000. This is what I checked with the Optical Society. But this year, because of the pandemic, they had to go online to the virtual platform. And the number of participants it increased to 20,000 people.
From 4,000 to 20,000.
Right. This is not the impact and the number that you can just ignore and say, okay, I want to go back to my traditional way of conferences and teaching. So we had a fast forward to future, but we should keep in our mind that we have a lot of work to do. So the type of lecturing, this online lecturing, which has to be combined with the offline lecturing, we have to really work hard on them to keep the students engaged. So we should avoid just to do again the same thing, the traditional thing, record the lecture, upload it, and ask the student to watch this 1 hour, a bit boring thing, you know, at home alone, and then bring them to the virtual Zoom platform.
So in a way, it's almost like a shift of power. In the past, if I listen to you, you could force your students, you have to be in this room, and if you're not, you will not pass the test. Now, the onus is on the professors to actually engage and interest the students.
Right. Exactly. There are new platforms. I mean, they are, and now everyone is trying to develop more and more. But to just name one, because I found it very interesting, there is a platform which is developed in Harvard again. And how it works, so the lecturer can upload the lectures before the main session, the Zoom session comes. And then the students just can all log in, look at the lecture, and they can comment. And just keep in mind that very soon we have the Generation Z and Generation Y at our universities. This is the generation who is used to commenting. They are in Twitter, Instagram, everywhere, right? They love tweeting and they love to express their opinion.
So maybe, Professor Schücking, you should be ready to get a star rating after every seminar, a bit like an Uber driver. This is potentially what the future. Would you accept that, a star rating for your seminars?
Oh, why not? Why not?
Why not? Okay, good. So we have a new initiative to introduce. Now, very quick fire round. One sentence, genuinely, I mean it, one sentence and a short one. We are in the Goethe-Saal, he had very long sentences, that is not the model. You're either top win from the first year of Max Planck schools or the top failure loss, something we didn't achieve. Let's start with Bernhard.
I think we see that the collaboration across disciplinary borders and across institutional borders between the university and the Max Planck institutes, in plural, as well as with other universities in one school, that works.
So,
That's
thumbs
fine.
up for that. Thank you very much. And then, Günter, Professor Leugering, what is your top win or your top loss?
is very similar. You know, we are very proud to have Max Planck at Erlangen. And Max Planck Institutes, Max Planck Society doesn't have the problems, most of the problems that we have, that we face in the universities. So this is international, there is globalization, there is excellence in science, and we benefit a lot. And in the first year, I think we had very good success in hiring, and as you can see, it sits right next to me. And this is a success story. We have to pursue this further, and also as a result of this discussion, I mean, we should shift powers. I mean, the way to be present in a room, to mentoring people, and not to give large lectures, you know, in a bad, you know, online thing that nobody really wants to see. And so for that matter, we focus much more on the mentoring, use the time that you have to really foster excellence in science.
Good, so I hear great candidates, and it qualifies technically as one sentence, but rather Thomas Mann here, with a lot of commas.
No, there's Kleist, there's also Kleist.
Kleist, of course, die langsame Verfertigung der Gedanken beim Reden, the slow production of thoughts while speaking. Hanieh, over to you.
Okay, go for an outlook. I think we can do much, much better in terms of teaching and lecturing within our school and using novel techniques for our school, especially during this time.
So big win for the Max Planck schools. We're there, we're using what's available. And what is the view from Jena, Professor Rosenthal?
Yes, it's not only the view from Jena. I'm one of the deans, of the two deans of the Max Planck schools, and I followed the development very closely. And I think that the Max Planck schools, and that I think some of that has been realized, they have the potential to have some impact on our academic system, that we get away from our local thinking, and that we connect institutions, but also that we connect, for example, master courses and PhD programs, which is unusual in Germany, a kind of a challenge. And so I think that the Max Planck schools can go ahead and introduce a major change in the German system.
So we had 4 wins out of 4 opinions so far. This is close to coming back to North Korea, the approval rating of the leadership over there. Let's see whether we also have some critical voices. What didn't work in the last year? Who wants to kick it off?
Well, I wouldn't say about things that didn't work so well, because what really worked and what will get better every following year is the network. So you were asking for short questions. My short question would have been, first, the young people, the doctoral candidates, they are great. Those young people that we have seen here last year, and we hopefully will see next year again, the people are in the first range, the best thing that we have won. And the network. And what the good thing is, the network will grow. And if I should think of anything that could be better, well, it always can grow more. And if we think of the Max Planck School Cognition that we are part of in Leipzig, of course, a growing network will help us tremendously.
Great, so really happy about how the network grew, and if anything, we could improve more of that faster.
Right.
And then finally, Patrick, very polite, British, well, what's your top win? Or maybe your...
Well, I think the first thing I would say is the students are excellent. So the Max Planck schools seem to recruit the best, and I think the students benefit from the cohort effect. So I think there have been some really interesting and positive interactions between students, even though they have been based in different universities and they have been taught remotely. So I think the group has brought a benefit to the students. I think the challenge as the students enter the research-based phase of the school will be to see how the school maintains its identity when each student is embedded in a lab and focused on their immediate research goals. So I will be interested to see how the student career develops as they focus on their own individual research project.
Thank you very much. And you had a chance to get a pint from me today. We had a deal to have a lively panel. Every single time you say, I disagree, you get a free pint from me. I didn't hear it yet. Do you want a pint?
In general, I don't like to disagree. I think I would like to agree with the concept of the Max Planck School, which has definitely lifted the visibility and the clarity of the doctoral offer in Germany. It's quite striking, for example, how many emails I get from people saying, I'm interested in doing a PhD. I notice you're part of the Max Planck School of Cognition.
That's fantastic. And as you know, as a neuroscientist, our brain is not very good with negations, the not. So I heard the sentence, I don't like to disagree. It contained the words, I disagree, so you get a pint for me. I look forward to seeing you in London, Patrick. Now, big thanks to all of you, because you made a real effort. You came from London, from Heidelberg, from all over Germany, because, and I get that, you care. And we just established how much more important the caring will be in education going forward, where we need to offer more rather than just a lecture. For now, big thanks to all of you, to Professor Bernhard Eitel, to Professor Thomas Hofmann, Professor Günter Leugering, and Walter Rosenthal, Professor Beate Schücking, and Dr. Hanieh Fattahi, and Professor Patrick Haggard. And you can choose the pub in London, by the way.